Imagine comparing the act of sharing your deepest personal beliefs to, like, holding a loaded Uzi.
Right, or arguing that failing to text a newcomer in your community is the moral equivalent of abandoning a newborn baby in the wilderness.
Yeah, it's intense. So today, for this deep dive, we are opening up a very specific, highly engineered operational playbook.
It really is a fascinating structural breakdown. We're looking at how a group fundamentally organizes, communicates, and scales its influence, basically from the ground up.
Exactly. And our source for this deep dive today is a transcript from a YouTube video. It's on a channel called Whosoever Believes,
Right.
and it's a Bible study session facilitated by Reverend Letty Carr. The title is WCWC Discipleship, Witnessing, and Follow-Up.
Which is great because it gives us this unfiltered window into their daily operational strategy.
Yeah, we aren't looking at, glossy public relations material here.
No, not at all. We are looking at exactly how they train their core members.
But before we go any further, I want to be incredibly clear with you listening. Our mission today is absolutely not to endorse, promote, or critique the theological viewpoints in this text.
Right. We are definitely not taking sides on religion or politics here.
No. Instead, we are looking at the source impartially to unpack the methodologies, the behavioral psychology, the grassroots strategies this group uses to build its network.
Because the tactical mechanics of how they mobilize everyday people are, they're incredibly methodical.
Oh, absolutely.
And they're worth analyzing, honestly, no matter what field you are in.
Yeah, if you're a community organizer, a marketer, or just a leader looking to build a self-sustaining movement, you can learn something from observing the deliberate intentionality they apply to mundane daily interactions.
I know.
So let's start with a structural concept the text introduces early on. Reverend Carr attributes this to a Pastor Jenkins. They call it the funnel.
The funnel, right?
Yeah, so if you visualize a physical funnel, the top is incredibly wide. And in their structural model, this wide top represents large-scale, barrier-free events. So, for instance, they talk about hosting these massive free Mother's Day and Father's Day concerts.
And we're talking top-name gospel artists here, like Shirley Caesar.
Right. And the underlying strategy behind that massive upfront investment is really what stands out to me.
Yeah, because the primary goal of these really expensive, heavily produced concerts is not immediate conversion.
Or even recruiting new church members, right?
Right. Carr explicitly notes that if someone fundamentally changes their life or, gets saved at the concert, that is just the gravy on top.
Which is so interesting. They are pouring resources into an event where the core objective isn't even their main mission.
Yeah.
It seems kind of counterintuitive at first.
It does, yeah, until you really look at the psychology of frictionless entry.
Okay, break that down for me.
So the real objective of the wide funnel is simply drawing people into a shared environment. Because when you explicitly try to recruit someone, their cognitive defenses immediately go up.
Oh, for sure. You expect a pitch.
Exactly. By throwing a free concert, you lower the barrier to entry to absolute zero. You create a space where people can just exist, have a good time, and experience the community without any pressure or obligation.
I see where this is going. It establishes a baseline positive association.
Right.
But what I found much more applicable, I think, in this transcript is that the funnel concept isn't just restricted to these heavily funded, large-scale church concerts.
No, not at all.
Reverend Carr teaches her members to apply this funnel architecture to literally just walking around on a Tuesday afternoon.
Yeah, she provides some highly specific examples of everyday microfunnels.
She really does. She talks about neighbors she has been trying to connect with for years. She observes that they love theater.
Right.
So her microfunnel is inviting them to a local church Christmas play.
Yeah. And then there's that completely different scenario where she accidentally buys a massive bulk amount of sugar at Costco.
Yes, the Costco sugar.
Instead of hoarding it or returning it, she basically weaponizes the sugar as a funnel.
That is such a funny way to put it, but it's true.
She walks over to her neighbors and simply offers it to them for free.
And this approach requires the community members to be hyper-observant of the people in their immediate vicinity, right?
Oh, yeah.
Carr uses fishing terminology to explain this mechanism. She references the biblical mandate to be fishers of men.
Right, which is a common phrase.
But she adds a critical operational caveat. She points out that each fish has a different bait.
And that's, well, actually, wait. I want to challenge that phrasing for a second.
Okay, go ahead.
Using a specific bait, like theater tickets or free Costco sugar, sounds a lot like a bait and switch.
I can see that.
It sounds a bit like secular relationship marketing, where you pretend to be someone's friend just to hit them with a sales pitch later. Does the text actually address that ethical gray area?
That is a really crucial distinction to make. And yes, in Card's framework, the goal of the free sugar or the play invitation is not to trick the neighbor into seeing still for a sermon right then and there. She emphasizes patience heavily. The text frames these as genuine acts of kindness designed to organically melt a person's apprehension over a long period.
Ah, okay. So it's about establishing trust infrastructure.
Precisely. It builds a relational bridge. The strategy relies on the law of reciprocity and just, basic human connection.
Right.
By delivering value on the neighbor's terms, whether that's theater or groceries, the believer ensures that when a life crisis hits or when the neighbor naturally starts asking questions, that communication channel is already wide open.
That makes a lot of sense. Which brings up a massive logistical challenge, though.
What's that?
How does a broad theoretical strategy like the funnel actually translate when executed by regular congregation members?
Oh, yeah, that's the real test.
During the session, Reverend Carr actually asks her study group to share abbreviated real-world field reports of doing this.
Yes, and the anecdotes are incredibly revealing.
They really showcase a decentralized grassroots operation in action.
Like we hear from a woman named Diane.
The salmon story.
Right. Diane is at the grocery store buying a suspiciously large amount of bulk salmon.
As you do.
Right. And the seafood clerk is naturally curious and asks why she's buying so much fish.
Yeah.
Diane explains she's cooking it for her neighbors. And when he asks what motivates her to do that, she casually drops the phrase, quote, "'cause that's the Jesus in me."
Wow.
And that single interaction opens the door to a church invite.
She takes a purely transactional moment, just buying fish,
Yeah.
and pivots it into a relational touchpoint.
Exactly. Then there is an Uber ride anecdote.
Oh, right, the driver.
The driver starts venting about his life stresses, and the passenger uses that opening to ask if he has considered giving his burdens to the Lord.
Just a simple pivot.
Yeah, and it leads to the driver reflecting on his childhood church experiences. But my absolute favorite field report comes from a woman named Margaret.
Yes, the Home Depot scenario.
Margaret is trying to help a friend paint a house, even though she openly admits to the group that she has no idea how to paint.
Which is relatable.
Very. They mess up the job by accidentally applying base coat instead of actual paint.
Right.
So they have to make an emergency run to Home Depot. They are in the aisle laughing at their own incompetence, and a stranger walks up.
Okay.
He gets caught up in their camaraderie, gives them some unsolicited paint advice, and then casually asks what church they attend.
It's so organic.
Right. And it turns out this man had been disconnected from his faith community for 8 years. The interaction ends with Margaret standing in the middle of a hardware store, openly praying with the stranger.
We have to pause and look at the underlying mechanics here.
Let's do it.
Because pushing a deeply personal religious conversation onto a stranger in a hardware store aisle that violates massive social norms.
Oh, absolutely.
Most people, whether they are secular or religious, would completely freeze. The biological fear of social rejection is intense.
I am so glad you brought that up because I was struggling with this exact concept while reading the transcript. How on earth do you train, like, an accountant or a school teacher to just override their biological fight or flight response in a Home Depot?
Right.
Does the text actually offer a psychological mechanism to overcome that anxiety, or does it just tell them to, be brave and power through it?
It definitely does not rely on willpower or bravery.
Okay.
Carr institutes a fascinating psychological pivot that we can call cognitive offloading.
Cognitive offloading. Tell me more.
She directly addresses the fear of inadequacy by telling her students that they do not need a PhD in theology. They do not need a master's of divinity.
Right.
More importantly, she tells them they do not need a perfect past. She shifts the burden of performance completely off the individual speaker.
And she uses a metaphor here that completely caught me off guard.
The Uzi metaphor.
Yes. She tells her students that they need to recognize the message itself is powerful, and she compares it to holding an Uzi in your hands.
It is a stark, arresting image for a religious text.
It really is. She tells them, you wouldn't hold a fully automatic weapon and worry about trying to make it powerful.
Right. The tool possesses inherent power. You just have to aim it.
Exactly. She is essentially telling her community, you do not have to be a smooth, charismatic talker. The message is the heavy machinery. Your only job is delivery.
Think about what that metaphor does to social anxiety.
It completely reframes it.
It brilliantly relieves the performance pressure. If you are doing a slick corporate sales pitch, the success of the pitch relies heavily on your charm and eloquence.
And if they reject the pitch, they are rejecting you.
Exactly. But if you believe the message operates entirely independently of your own skill, like a machine, the fear of messing up the delivery vanishes.
To further reduce that pressure, Carr uses her own life history as proof. She leans heavily into her imperfections.
Yeah.
She describes her younger self using a great phrase, toe up from the flow up.
Which means she was an absolute disaster.
A complete mess, yeah. She admits that 40 years ago, she and her college friends were, quote, jacked up chicks at the party boogieing.
I love that phrasing.
But today, they are all leading ministries. She uses her past disasters to prove that the imperfection of the messenger is not a liability. In fact, it is the core of the credibility.
It is a profound reframing of authority.
Yeah.
She isn't selling her own perfection. She is selling a transformation process that she herself is still actively undergoing.
It completely neutralizes the fear of being exposed as a hypocrite.
Right.
If she leads by saying, look at what a mess I was, it sends a signal to the person listening that perfection is not a prerequisite for entry.
Absolutely. But this logic leads us to a necessary complication.
Okay, what's that?
Vulnerability and confidence don't guarantee a warm reception.
Oh, that's true.
What happens when you throw the bait? Or you fire the so-called Uzi and the person aggressively rejects the message?
Right. That's a huge hurdle. And the transcript actually tackles this head-on during the study session.
Yes, with Grenette.
Yeah, a woman named Grenette brings up a very real, very painful scenario. She explains that she has tried to share her beliefs with her family members, and they shut her down in an angry, highly dramatic way.
Yeah.
She wants to know the operational protocol for that kind of hostility.
And family dynamics are famously the hardest place to change minds because of all the entrenched history, right?
Exactly. So Carr's response to Grenette's dilemma is, from a behavioral psychology standpoint, vital to understanding how this group sustains its momentum.
Carr instructs Grenette to completely reframe the nature of the rejection.
How so?
She references Ephesians, which is an ancient biblical letter famous for its imagery of putting on spiritual armor, to remind Grenette that her battle is not against flesh and blood.
Oh, so Carr tells her not to view the angry family member as the enemy.
Exactly. Instead, she instructs Grenette to realize that there is an ungodly spirit, or a demon, acting as a sentry.
A sentry. That's an interesting word.
Right. This invisible sentry is guarding the territory and intentionally trying to intimidate the believer into backing down.
Let's analyze why that framing is so functionally important.
Okay.
By separating the loved one from the rejection, essentially externalizing the conflict onto an invisible third party, the believer is protected from taking the hostility personally.
It's almost like a customer service rep dealing with a furious caller.
Oh, that's a perfect comparison.
In training, reps are taught to realize the customer isn't actually mad at them. They are mad at the company or the product.
Right. By externalizing the anger, the rep doesn't absorb the emotional damage.
Exactly. Carr is essentially creating a spiritual version of that psychological shield to protect, family Thanksgiving dinners from turning into war zones.
That is such a great way to put it. It de-escalates the interpersonal tension immediately.
Yeah.
You don't get into a screaming match with your sister, because in this framework, it isn't actually your sister yelling at you, it is the sentry.
Right. Furthermore, this cognitive shield shifts the believer's response from outward arguing, which obviously damages relationships, to inward persistent prayer.
It allows them to maintain the mission without destroying the family bond.
Yeah. And Carr provides an analogy to explain why you cannot simply walk away when you face that sentry.
The teenager analogy.
Yes. She compares it to waking up a 14-year-old for school. Imagine the teenager looks at you and says, I'm not going to school anymore.
Right.
As a parent, you don't throw your hands up and say, well, they made their choice, nothing I can do. You demand they get out of bed.
You stay persistent, not hostile, but aggressively intentional in your care for them.
Exactly. You do not abandon the objective simply because you encounter initial resistance.
Which perfectly transitions us to the final structural question of this deep dive.
Okay.
Let's assume the wide funnel works. Let's assume the believer pushes past the sentry, the message resonates, and the person officially joins the community.
Right.
Does the playbook say the job is finished?
Oh, absolutely not. According to this transcript, acquisition is only the beginning. Yeah, in fact, bringing someone in might be the simplest phase. The text places a massive, almost disproportionate emphasis on what they call follow-up.
And this is where Reverend Carr delivers the most brutal analogy of the entire session.
It is intense.
She states that bringing someone into the faith and then failing to follow up with them is the equivalent of giving birth to a baby, driving out to the wilderness, dumping the newborn on the ground, and just hoping it figures out how to survive.
It is a shocking mental image. But, it highlights a massive operational flaw in many organizations.
How so?
Whether we are talking about corporate onboarding, secular social clubs, or religious groups, there is often a massive focus on acquisition, getting people in the door.
Because it's sexy and measurable, right?
Exactly. But retention, the invisible labor of keeping them engaged, often falls by the wayside. Carr is arguing that acquisition without retention is essentially abandonment.
Wow. And she pushes back aggressively against the concept of the lone wolf participant.
She really does.
She argues that being part of this community is not a solo endeavor. She uses the metaphor of a human body. Like if your finger is crushed in a door, you can't just ignore it and say the rest of the body is fine.
Right.
The entire nervous system is impacted by that localized pain.
And to illustrate this, she highlights a specific community member, a volunteer named B, who is apparently legendary within their ranks for her follow-up skills.
Yeah, B is constantly monitoring the community's digital prayer app.
Right.
She is texting people, asking for updates on their sick relatives, and systematically following up on prayer requests.
And the transcript claims this invisible labor literally saves lives.
The story about the young woman in London.
Yes. Carr recounts this harrowing story about a young woman living in London who had become severely suicidal. She had completely given up on her life.
That's heartbreaking.
But this young woman testified later that it was the relentless follow-up, the continuous stream of check-ins and encouragement from the church family that pulled her back from the edge.
That single deliberate act of sending a text message to ask about someone's week became the difference between survival and tragedy.
It's powerful. And this relentless focus on retention feeds directly into the ultimate structural goal of their entire system multiplication.
Which brings us to the pyramid scheme comparison.
Yes, Carr actually compares their model of replicating disciples to the business structure of Amway.
Wait, Amway?
Yeah. Now, we should note she is very quick to clarify that the financial multi-level marketing aspect of Amway is a separate issue.
Right.
She is absolutely not endorsing financial pyramid schemes.
Yeah, she literally waves it off in the text, saying that's a whole nother issue.
But she extracts the underlying logistical mechanism. A traditional centralized broadcast model, like a TV preacher, has a single hub speaking to many spokes.
Right, which is fragile.
Exactly. The Amway model is a decentralized network. You learn a concept, you teach it to someone else, and crucially, you teach them how to teach it to the next person.
Oh, I see.
The movement grows exponentially through peer-to-peer replication. The objective is not to create a follower. The objective is to create a multiplying teacher.
When you lay out all these mechanics, observing neighbors for custom bait, overcoming intense social anxiety, battling invisible sentries, systematically texting newcomers, and training the next generation of teachers, it sounds utterly exhausting.
It really does.
What fuels this engine? What prevents these volunteers from burning out after 6 months?
That question leads to perhaps the most profound psychological insight in the entire transcript.
Okay, I'm listening.
Carr teaches a concept based on an ancient text where Jesus states that his food is to do the will of the one who sent him. Carr interprets this metaphorically, teaching her students that they must find their ultimate sustenance in their purpose.
So the actual labor of engaging in this cycle of witnessing and following up becomes the fuel itself.
Precisely. She argues that true psychological contentment doesn't come from external validation or physical comfort.
Yeah, in modern life, people constantly run around seeking affirmation from their peers, their bosses, or social media.
Exactly. But Carr teaches that if you know your purpose, which, in this framework, is expanding this specific community, you stop needing external sources to confirm your value.
Because your daily actions are constantly validating your core identity.
She tells her group, you already know who you are. They might affirm, but God confirmed.
It builds an incredibly resilient psychological loop. The work itself is the reward.
It creates a self-sustaining motivational engine.
Right.
The more you share your message and follow up with your network, the more grounded you feel in your own identity. That grounded identity then gives you the energy required to go back out and share the message again.
It's brilliant. So what does this operational playbook mean for you, the listener?
Yeah.
Even if you step entirely outside of the religious context, this transcript outlines a highly effective architecture for intentional community building. It demonstrates the strategic power of viewing your daily mundane interactions as frictionless entry points. It showcases the psychological shielding required to separate a person you care about from their aggressive rejection of your ideas.
Right.
And it highlights the non-negotiable responsibility of relentless follow-up, ensuring that newcomers to your organization never feel like wilderness babies.
I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder.
Let's hear it.
Consider a secular community, a hobby, a startup, or a cause that you are deeply passionate about right now.
Okay.
If you were to adopt this level of deliberate, hyper-observant funneling in your daily interactions, and you paired it with a systematic, uncompromising protocol for follow-up, how entirely different would your network, your influence, and your own internal sense of purpose look a year from now?
Wow. It certainly makes you think differently about that next bulk purchase at Costco.
You might just be buying bait.
Or picking up a newsie.
Exactly.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. We'll catch you on the next one.